Hello everyone, and welcome to the Anti-News Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Grasso, and thank you for tuning in. Today's date is November 15th, and as always, I've got 5 happy stories for you. First up, the monarch butterfly population grows, the sea turtle population does the same, and ponds that come back from the dead. After the music break, an Australian marsh makes a remarkable recovery, and a World War II veteran honors his fallen brothers in arms. The act of migration is when a species moves from one area to another, typically over a great distance. It's not only a fascinating event to watch, but it also gives researchers a chance to see how the population is doing without having to track down every individual. One well-known creature that migrates is the Monarch Butterfly, which will travel between the United States and Mexico depending on the season. In 2020, it was reported that there was only around 2,000 monarch butterflies left, a drastic decline from their roughly 1.2 million in the 1990s, and below the extinction threshold as well. However, not all hope is lost, as while they haven't been counted yet, the numbers are way up this year. The official count started on November 13th, as per the 25th annual Western Monarch Thanksgiving count. Over 100 community scientists get together to count the population, but early reports are promising that the Western monarchs have grown in numbers. Several sites that count butterflies have reported higher numbers than last year, such as the Pacific Grove overwintering site. Last year, there wasn't a single butterfly that stopped there, but this year there was roughly 1,300. Pismo State Beach Monarch Butterfly Grove and an adjacent site got around 8,000, a staggering growth from the 300 of last year. As of writing this, 10,000 butterflies have been accounted for overall at the overwinter sites, which compared to last year's count of less than 2,000 is tremendous news. Emma Pelton, a senior conservation biologist and Western monarch lead for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, says, "We are overjoyed that migratory monarch butterflies have not disappeared from the western U.S. These early counts give us hope that, if we all work together, we can still bring western monarchs back." While insect populations can fluctuate, higher numbers of them are a good sign of how the environment is doing. Butterflies in particular are very important, since as pollinators they help our crops grow, and without their help, we wouldn't be able to grow enough food to go around. Nature is amazing, and we should do everything we can to protect it. For those of us who grew up in first world countries, or parts of the world that are economically well off, the thought of eating an endangered creature seems outright abhorrent to many. After all, it's a creature that could be lost to all but the history books if we don't protect it. But to those in less wealthy countries, that might not be as big of a concern, as was the case in Cape Verde. Economic hardship for the country led to people seeing loggerhead turtles as not a creature that needed protection, but as a creature that could fill their bellies. Thankfully, that's changing thanks to conservation efforts and improving fortunes, and as a result, the turtle's population is growing. The archipelago has the world's second most visited nesting spot for sea turtles, with the nest count growing from 10,725 to nearly 200,000 on the islands of Sal, Mau, and Boa Vista over the course of 6 years. This is thanks to improved economics and boots-on-the-ground work, the first of which has led to significantly less poaching which was one of the biggest issues the nests faced. During nesting season, hundreds of people from local non-profit organizations patrol the beach to count the nests during the night. They'll also protect the turtles from poachers, measure them, and secure tracking chips to them to study their movements and nesting patterns. Gilberto Silva, Cape Verdean Minister of Agriculture and Environment, explained, "With environmental education, watching over 180 kilometers of beaches and applying new legislation that criminalizes hunting and consumption of turtles, the catch rate has decreased significantly from 8.25% in 2015 to 1.54% in 2020. New environmental laws that were passed in 2018 to punish poachers have also been helpful in taking care of turtles. Poachers who get caught are often sentenced to long hours of community service in which they have to follow around and help those working on the Loggerhead Conservation Program. This gives the poachers the opportunity to see the turtles not as a meal ticket, but as a valuable part of nature that should be protected for future generations." Change is the nature of the universe. Big or small, everything will change. Whether that means getting older, bigger, smaller, or something else entirely. What makes humans special from any other animal is that we can control how that change will go. The poachers' actions were a change for the worse, but the actions of those working to protect the turtles and change the mindset of poachers who have been caught is the change for the better. When we think of things rising from the dead, we think of zombies, Pet Cemetery, basically any sort of undead horror monster that we've come to know from TV and movies. I bet you've never heard of a zombie pond before. I know I certainly hadn't until finding this story. The actual term is ghost pond, and while just as spooky sounding, they're actually quite special, and have brought a special surprise along with them. The English county of Norfolk is home to more ponds than any other county, and thanks to the Norfolk Ponds Project, even more are being rediscovered. The project was created a decade ago by the University College London's Pond Restoration Research Group, who have been studying 200-year-old maps to locate ancient watering holes. During the 1800s, after World War II, there was a massive drive to feed the nation, which led to these ponds being filled and plowed over in favor of farmland. This was the start of the decline of the wetlands in Norfolk, which were home to many species of plants and wildlife. The goal of the Norfolk Ponds Project was not only to rediscover these ponds, but also to dig them up. And according to Carl Sayer, the UCL professor of geography, what happened surprised even them. According to him, the seeds of water plants were still alive underneath the earth, even though it had been plowed, furrowed, fertilized, and used to grow crops. The term ghost ponds is very apt. They leave behind a trace of their presence, and after centuries of burial, with a little help, they come back from the dead. If you can bring back the plants, everything else follows. Rare species, such as the grass polly, a small flower that grows between 10 and 60 centimeters, have started to reappear in areas where they haven't been seen for a long time thanks to the restoration. The restoration process itself is fairly simple, as all that's needed is to dig out the shape of the original watering hole, while being careful not to disturb the ground beneath the pond sediment, where countless rare, or even regionally extinct seeds are. There's still a lot of work to be done, however, as there are some 8,000 ghost ponds in Norfolk alone. At the time of writing this, the Norfolk Ponds Project has unearthed 250, but their enthusiasm is still strong. Professor Sayer says, "We've been busy restoring hedges and meadows and growing bird food crops, and these ponds are sitting there being completely forgotten about. People are starting to realize that these tiny lenses of water out in the fields are actually really important. By reviving them, you lift the whole landscape." Normally, when we talk about history being buried, we're referring to things that people of the past might not have wanted us to know about, such as female pharaohs, but in this case, history was literally buried. By digging it up, not only did we learn about the plants that were there, but have brought them back as well. No matter how bad our history may be, it's worth preserving for future generations. One thing that often gets passed along from generation to generation is music. So let's go to the music break. That was Feel Good by Justhea. Now on to the last two stories. It's often joked that everything in Australia will try to kill you. And while that's only a slight exaggeration, back in 2019, it felt as if the land itself were trying to kill those who lived there. Fires swept through the marshes that were normally supplied by the Macquarie River, but unfortunately drought had choked it off. Firefighters were left unable to do anything about it, which was bad not only because it let the fire spread, but also because of the disruption to wildlife. However, by some miracle, in the 2 years since the fire, the marshes have recovered. Listed under the Ramsar Convention for Wetlands of International Importance, named after the Iranian city where it was signed in 1971, the Macquarie Marshes were devastated by the 2019 wildfires. The land is considered important internationally, in part because it's the nesting ground for 77 different species of water birds and home to 156 species of woodland birds, and many other animals as well. On top of that, It's also part of the traditional land of the Whalewan people, a group of Australian Aboriginals who are part of the larger, and I apologize if I mispronounce this, Ngiyampa Nation that can be found in New South Wales. Given these facts, it's easy to see why it's such an important place, and why it was so devastating when it got burned down. Thankfully, in the 2 years since the fires, there's almost no sign of the damage, thanks to plenty of rain which brought the river back, and has filled the Burrendong Dam reservoir past 100%. 2019 was the first time the dam had run dry since it was built back in the 1960s. And given that it can hold up to 1,188 gigaliters, you can imagine that it takes a lot to empty it. For reference, 1 gigaliter is the same as 1 billion liters, so that's a lot of water. To prevent something like this from happening again, officials say that they have made major infrastructure improvements so that fire response won't be impeded. The 2021 Waterbird survey by the University of New South Wales in Sydney found that most of the birds that lived there are returning. Professor Richard Kingsford told ABC News Australia, "It's just so great to be able to fly over the marshes because you see this water everywhere, and biodiversity, and lots of water birds." Nature is incredibly resilient. Despite the devastation caused by the fire, in only 2 years, the marshes have recovered and are doing great. It just goes to show that with enough time, nature can recover from almost anything, but it's still our duty to try and protect it. When making a campfire, make sure that the area around it is clear of anything flammable. Keep something to extinguish the fire on hand, such as a bucket of water or a fire extinguisher, and have someone keep an eye on it at all times. Fire is one of man's greatest inventions, but like any invention, it's important that we use it properly and safely. Operation Neptune, more commonly known as D-Day, took place during World War II and was the largest seaborne invasion in history. The operation was the start of France's liberation and what laid the foundations of the Allied victory on the Western Front. Soldiers from all the Allied nations took part, and it's estimated that at least 10,000 of them lost their lives on that day. By the end of the Battle of Normandy, the estimate grew to 209,000 casualties. We remember the battles, but hardly do we ever think of the soldiers, either the ones who died or the ones who survived. But one of those surviving soldiers has been working to help change that. Harry Billing is a 96-year-old British veteran who fought on Gold Beach, the center of the 5 landing areas. At the time, he was 18 and served with the 59th Independent Squadron of the Royal Engineers, and saw many of his friends die on Gold Beach. He's been working to raise funds for a tribute in remembrance of those who died in battle, having returned from France before going out for his 68th straight year of collecting donations for military charities. Billing traveled across the channel to support a tribute, recording all the names of the 22,442 service personnel who died under British command on D-Day and the Battle of Normandy. He described it as his last duty to them, and had collected over £50,000 towards the construction of the memorial, which he was incredibly moved to see standing. However, he didn't stop to rest after seeing it put up, and went right back out collecting funds to keep it maintained and to build an educational center nearby. The veteran's newfound fame led to people lining up to hand in donations to him and thank him for his service. He had started collecting for the Normandy Memorial Trust in 2018 and had raised the funds through his local market. Billing said, I don't think I could give you words to it about how I felt. It was very, very moving for me, and it still moves me now. I had a wonderful time because everyone there knows me now in Normandy. Everything I've done has been for the memorial. I'm not a proud man. Pride is a deadly sin. But I am very happy that I was able to collect money and do my bit. In Canada, we have a holiday called Remembrance Day. It takes place on November 11th, and on that day, we take a minute to stop what we're doing and have a moment of silence, typically at 11 a.m., to think about those who gave their lives so that we could live in peace. While Remembrance Day will have passed by the time this episode is out, I'd like for everyone listening to join me in a moment of silence in memory of those who died in war so that we may know peace. Here's today's advice. When lifting a heavy object, try to keep your back as straight as possible and instead bend with your knees. This way, you reduce the risk of back injury and have an easier time lifting the object in question. That's it for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to support this podcast, you can find it on YouTube, Spotify, Google and Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spreaker. Links can be found in the description, and until next time, remember that there is still some good in the world, you just gotta look for it. Take care out there, everyone.